You've probably heard it before. You never go out anymore. You're wasting your youth. Don't you get bored just sitting at home? And maybe you've tried to explain it. Maybe you've said you're tired, or busy, or that you'll come next time. But here's the truth you don't say out loud. You don't want to go. Not because you're antisocial or broken, but because home is where you feel most alive. If that sounds like you, stay with me. Because today we're diving deep into the psychology of people who genuinely love staying at home. And I promise, by the end of this, you're going to understand yourself in ways you never have before. Let's start with something most people don't understand. There's a difference between being alone and being lonely. Loneliness is painful. It's that ache in your chest when you desperately want connection but can't find it. But solitude? Solitude is a choice. It's intentional. It's finding peace in your own company. And psychologically, these two states activate completely different parts of your brain. Studies using brain imaging have shown that people who enjoy solitude show increased activity in areas associated with self-reflection, creativity, and emotional regulation. They're not shutting down. They're turning inward, and that's where the magic happens. Your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for complex thinking and self-awareness, actually functions more efficiently when you're alone and relaxed. It's as if your brain finally gets the space it needs to do its deepest work. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Not everyone who loves staying home is an introvert. Yes, introversion plays a role for many people. Introverts, as psychologist Carl Jung originally described them, direct their energy inward. Social interactions, even enjoyable ones, consume their mental resources. They need time alone to process, to recharge, to restore their energy. But there's another group of people who love staying home for entirely different reasons. They're what psychologists call highly sensitive persons, or HSPS. These individuals have a more reactive nervous system. They process sensory information more deeply. The noise of a crowded restaurant isn't just background sound to them. It's overwhelming. The bright lights, the multiple conversations, the unpredictability of social situations, all of it registers more intensely in their brain. For them, home isn't just a preference, it's a necessity. It's the only environment where their nervous system can truly relax. Dr. Elaine Aron, who pioneered research on high sensitivity, found that approximately 15 to 20% of the population has this trait. And it's not a disorder or a weakness, it's simply a different way of processing the world. And then there's another layer, control. Think about your average day outside your home. You're navigating traffic you can't control, dealing with people whose moods you can't predict, sitting in spaces where you can't adjust the temperature or the lighting or the noise level. You're essentially in a state of constant adaptation. Your brain is working overtime to manage all these external variables, but at home, you set the rules. You control the temperature, the lighting, what you eat, when you eat, what sounds fill your space. Psychologically, this sense of control reduces cortisol levels, the stress hormone. It tells your brain, you're safe here, you can stop being on guard. For people with anxiety disorders, or those who've experienced trauma, this element of control isn't just comfortable, it's therapeutic. It's the difference between surviving and actually living. Your home becomes what psychologists call a secure base, a concept from attachment theory that describes a safe haven from which you can explore the world on your own terms. But let's talk about what society gets wrong. There's this narrative that a full life is a busy life, that if you're not constantly out there, making memories, attending events, saying yes to every invitation, then you're somehow missing out. Social media has amplified this to an extreme degree. Everyone's posting their highlight reels, their adventures, their social gatherings. And if you're at home on a Saturday night, there's this subtle pressure that whispers, everyone else is out there living, what's wrong with you? But here's what the research actually shows. A study published in the British Journal of Psychology found that highly intelligent people actually derive less satisfaction from frequent social interaction. The researchers theorized that these individuals are better able to adapt to modern life without relying on the intense tribal bonds that our ancestors needed for survival. They've essentially evolved past the need for constant social stimulation. Their brains are occupied with complex thoughts, projects, ideas. They don't need external entertainment because their internal world is rich enough. They're playing chess while others are playing checkers, so to speak. Their mental landscape is so engaging that the external world often feels like a distraction rather than an enhancement. And speaking of the internal world, let's talk about creativity. Some of history's greatest thinkers, artists, and innovators were notorious homebodies. Emily Dickinson barely left her house for the last 20 years of her life, yet she wrote some of the most profound poetry in American literature. Marcel Proust spent years in his cork-lined room writing In Search of Lost Time. Isaac Newton developed his theories during isolation. Nikola Tesla preferred working alone in his laboratory. Even modern creators like J.K. Rowling wrote much of Harry Potter in quiet cafes and at home, not at parties or networking events. Bill Gates takes Think Weeks, where he isolates himself in a cabin to read and reflect. There's a reason for this pattern. Creativity requires uninterrupted mental space. It needs silence, not stimulation. It needs depth, not distraction. When you're constantly surrounded by other people's voices, other people's opinions, other people's energy, your own voice gets drowned out. But in solitude, in that quiet space at home, your thoughts can stretch out. You can follow an idea down its rabbit hole without someone interrupting to change the subject. You can explore the depths of your imagination without having to surface every few minutes to engage in small talk. The most innovative ideas rarely come from brainstorming sessions with groups. They come from quiet minds given the space to wander. Psychologists have a term for this: deliberate solitude. It's different from social isolation. Social isolation is often involuntary and associated with negative health outcomes. But deliberate solitude is chosen, purposeful, and actually correlates with higher levels of well-being. Research from the University of Rochester found that people who engage in regular periods of deliberate solitude show increased self-awareness, better emotional regulation, and stronger personal identity. They know who they are because they've spent time with themselves. They're not constantly moulding their personality to fit whatever social situation they're in. They've had the space to discover their authentic preferences, their real values, their genuine interests, not just what others expect of them. They understand their triggers, their patterns, their emotional landscape, and this self-knowledge is the foundation of emotional intelligence and personal growth. Now, I want to address something important. There's a shadow side to all of this, because while loving home can be healthy and fulfilling, it can also become a hiding place. If you're staying home because leaving triggers panic attacks, that's not preference, that's agoraphobia. If you're avoiding people because you've convinced yourself they don't want you around, that's not solitude, that's depression lying to you. If you're isolating because past trauma has made the outside world feel dangerous, that's not peace, that's unprocessed pain. The key question you need to ask yourself is this: am I staying home because it nourishes me, or because everything else has become too difficult? Do I feel energized and content in my solitude, or do I feel stuck and hopeless? Because one is a personality trait, the other is a mental health concern that deserves support, and there's no shame in recognizing the difference. In fact, that recognition is the first step toward healing. If your home has become a prison rather than a sanctuary, if weeks go by without meaningful human contact, if the thought of leaving fills you with dread rather than just a mild preference to stay, these are signs that you might need professional support. And seeking that support isn't weakness, it's wisdom. For those who genuinely thrive at home, there's something beautiful happening. You've discovered what psychologists call optimal functioning in low arousal environments. Your brain simply doesn't need the level of external stimulation that others crave. You find satisfaction in subtle pleasures. The way morning light filters through your window, the ritual of making your favourite meal exactly the way you like it, the comfort of your own bed, the freedom to spend 3 hours reading without anyone suggesting you should be doing something more productive. These aren't small things. These are the moments that actually make up a life. We've been sold this idea that life happens out there in the Instagram-worthy moments. But real life, the texture of actual human existence, happens in the quiet accumulation of ordinary moments, and you've figured out how to be present for those. You're not distracted by the need to document everything or perform for an audience. You're actually living moment by moment in full awareness. You notice the small details that others rush past, the smell of rain through an open window, the satisfaction of organizing your space exactly how you want it, the pleasure of having nowhere to be and nothing to prove. There's also a cognitive benefit that researchers have recently identified. People who spend significant time alone tend to develop stronger internal locus of control. This means they believe their life outcomes are primarily determined by their own actions rather than external forces. Why? Because when you're alone, you can't blame your mood on other people. You can't distract yourself from your thoughts with constant social interaction. You're forced to develop a relationship with yourself, to understand your own patterns, to take responsibility for your own emotional state. This builds psychological resilience. It creates a stable sense of self that doesn't depend on external validation. You become your own source of stability, your own cheerleader, your own best friend. And that's a superpower that many people never develop because they're too busy seeking themselves in the reflections of others. When you can make yourself happy, when you can regulate your own emotions, when you can find peace within yourself, you become truly free. You're no longer at the mercy of other people's availability or approval. And let's talk about relationships. There's a misconception that people who love staying home don't value relationships. That's completely false. What they value is quality over quantity. They'd rather have one deep, meaningful conversation than 10 superficial ones. They'd rather spend an evening with someone who truly sees them than attend a party full of acquaintances. Their relationships tend to be more selective, but also more intimate. They've learned that not all connection is created equal, that sometimes saying no to a social obligation is actually saying yes to your own well-being, and that's not selfish. That's self-awareness. When they do choose to engage socially, they bring their full presence, their full attention. They're not there out of obligation or fear of missing out. They're there because they genuinely want to be. And that quality of presence makes their relationships deeper and more meaningful. Their friends know that when they show up, they're really there. Not distracted, not counting the minutes until they can leave, but fully engaged. And paradoxically, this selectivity often leads to more satisfying relationships than the person who says yes to everything, but is never fully present anywhere.
I'm going to be late.
Here's something fascinating from neuroscience. Our brains have what's called a default mode network, or DMN. This network activates when we're not focused on the outside world, when we're daydreaming, reminiscing, imagining the future, or thinking about ourselves and others. People who spend more time in quiet, solitary activities show stronger and more efficient DMN functioning. This network is crucial for self-understanding, empathy, and meaning-making. So when you're home, seemingly doing nothing, your brain is actually doing some of its most important work. It's integrating experiences, processing emotions, constructing your sense of identity. This can't happen when you're constantly engaged with external stimuli. Your brain needs downtime, not in the sense of entertainment, but in the sense of unstructured time where it can organize itself, make connections between ideas, and consolidate memories. This is when insights happen. This is when you suddenly understand something that's been puzzling you. This is when personal growth occurs. Scientists have found that breakthrough moments, those aha experiences, almost always happen during these quiet, unfocused periods. Not when you're actively trying to solve a problem, but when you've given your mind the space to work on it in the background. But modern society hasn't caught up with this science. We still operate under this extrovert ideal, as author Susan Cain calls it. The assumption that the ideal self is gregarious, comfortable in the spotlight, and energized by social interaction. Schools reward the kids who raise their hands constantly. Workplaces promote the people who thrive in open office environments and endless meetings. Dating culture favors those who are comfortable approaching strangers in bars. And all of this sends a message to those who prefer quieter ways of being. Something is wrong with you. Fix yourself. Be more outgoing. But the truth is, there's nothing to fix. Your way of being in the world is just as valid, just as valuable, and often just as productive as anyone else's. In fact, some research suggests that people who prefer solitude often make better leaders because they're more thoughtful in their decision-making, less influenced by groupthink, and more willing to take unpopular but correct positions. They're not swayed by the loudest voice in the room because they've learned to trust their own inner voice. There's also an economic argument to consider. Think about how much money people spend trying to entertain themselves outside their homes. The dinners out, the concerts, the bar tabs, the weekend trips. There's nothing wrong with any of that if it genuinely brings you joy. But if you're doing it because you think you're supposed to, because everyone else is, because staying home feels like admitting defeat, then you're spending money on experiences that drain you rather than fulfill you. People who love staying home often have more financial freedom because they're not constantly trying to buy happiness through experiences they don't actually want. They've figured out that contentment doesn't have a price tag, that the best things in life, the feeling of being truly relaxed, The pleasure of pursuing your interests, the peace of a quiet evening, these are free. They're not paying for the privilege of being uncomfortable in loud, crowded spaces. They're investing in books, hobbies, comfort, things that actually enhance their quality of life, rather than just providing temporary distraction. Let's also discuss the concept of energy management versus time management. Most productivity advice focuses on managing your time better, but people who thrive at home understand something deeper. It's not about having enough time, it's about having enough energy. Every social interaction, every trip outside your comfort zone, every hour in a stimulating environment costs energy, and that energy is finite. You can't just push through it or willpower your way to more. When your energy is depleted, everything becomes harder. Your mood drops, your patience wears thin, your ability to think clearly diminishes. But when you protect your energy by spending time in environments that restore rather than drain you, everything else in your life works better. You're more creative, more patient, more capable. You're not running on empty. And that makes you better at everything you do, including the social interactions you do choose to have. You show up as your best self because you haven't exhausted yourself trying to be someone you're not. There's something powerful about recognizing your limits and honoring them. We live in a culture that celebrates pushing past your comfort zone, that treats every limit as something to be overcome. But not every limit is a weakness. Sometimes a limit is just information about who you are and what you need. If your body tells you it needs 8 hours of sleep, that's not laziness, that's biology. If your nervous system tells you it needs quiet time to function well, that's not antisocial behavior, that's self-knowledge. The people who thrive are often not the ones who ignore their limits, but the ones who understand and work with them. They've stopped fighting against their own nature and started designing a life that works with it. And that shift from resistance to acceptance is transformative. Consider also the environmental perspective. People who spend more time at home often have a smaller carbon footprint. They're not constantly driving or flying to entertainment venues. They're not consuming resources at restaurants and bars. They're not participating in the endless cycle of consumption that modern social life often demands. There's something quietly sustainable about a life lived primarily at home. It's not wasteful, it's not excessive, it's intentionally simple. And in a world facing climate crisis, there's actually something admirable about finding contentment without constant consumption. So if you're someone who turns down invitations without guilt, who feels genuinely content on a Saturday night with just yourself and a good book, who'd rather rewatch your comfort show than force yourself into situations that drain you, here's what I want you to know. You're not missing out. You're tuning in to yourself, to your needs, to what actually brings you peace. You're not antisocial. You're selectively social. You're not boring. You're introspective. You're not wasting time. You're investing in your internal world, which is the only world you'll inhabit for your entire life. You're not broken or flawed or in need of fixing. You're simply wired differently, and that wiring is not a bug. It's a feature. It's given you depth, creativity, self-awareness, and the ability to be content with your own company, which is perhaps the most valuable skill anyone can develop. The goal isn't to never leave your house. It's to stop apologizing for the way you're wired. It's to recognize that a meaningful life doesn't have to be a loud one. That depth matters more than breadth. That knowing yourself deeply is worth more than knowing 100 people superficially. So the next time someone tells you need to get out more, you can smile and think to yourself, I'm exactly where I need to be. And maybe, just maybe, they're the ones who need to spend more time getting comfortable with themselves at home. Because at the end of the day, the relationship you have with yourself in the quiet moments when no one else is around, that's the relationship that determines the quality of your entire life, and you've mastered it.